Hello everyone! Tonight we're cracking open a chapter of history that's rarely whispered about in textbooks, a realm where human nature clashed fiercely with divine decree, lived out in candlelit corners, shadowy cloisters, and the hushed intimacy of the confessional. We're talking about lust, sex, and sin in the Middle Ages. Before we plunge into this fascinating, sometimes shocking, and often surprisingly human landscape, just a quick heads up. You probably wouldn't survive this journey if you truly lived it back then. Not because it's too spicy, though it definitely gets there, but because if you'd lived in medieval times with a curious mind and an even slightly active libido, chances are you'd have ended up in the stocks, whipped, or even burned at the stake, depending on the week and the severity of your transgressions. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm absolutely fascinated by your perspectives, so please let me know where you're watching or listening from tonight, and what time it is for you right now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The monastery, a battlefield of the body. You start tonight's pilgrimage not in a bustling medieval town or a sultry tavern, but in a monastery. Yeah, not exactly where you expect to find a lot of sin, right? The air here smells like candle wax, damp stone, and something faintly medicinal, perhaps herbs from the infirmary. It's quiet, eerily so, the kind of profound silence that makes every cough feel like a thunderclap. But even here, tucked away behind thick monastery walls and layers of solemn vows, desire flickers like a stubborn flame, a persistent spark in the darkness. The monks around you wear coarse wool robes, their heads shaved in a circular pattern known as the tonsure, a symbolic renunciation of worldly vanity. They're supposed to have renounced the pleasures of the flesh. Lust is an enemy here, a prowling beast to be constantly battled. And yet, you notice how Brother Thomas avoids Sister Agnes's gaze just a little too pointedly during Mass. His fingers twitch when she walks past the cloister garden. She, in turn, clutches her rosary tighter than seems strictly necessary, her knuckles white. You learn quickly that this isn't some one-off scandal. Medieval monasteries were battlefields of the body, places where monks and nuns fought constant, exhausting wars with their own thoughts and desires. Sex was the original spiritual enemy, especially because you couldn't just banish it with fasting and cold baths. It was internal, insidious. There were confessionals full of slippery accidents, dreams that left garments stained with unholy residue, and private moments with saints' statues that really didn't age well once their true purpose was whispered about. One of the more bizarre features you discover is that monks kept records, detailed, awkwardly honest ones. You stumble upon a case of a 12th century abbot who confessed that the devil would show him visions of naked women in church. Yes, in church, during prayer. And did these visions tempt him? Oh, absolutely. He once described being so tormented he rammed his face into the cold stone floor to calm himself down. Didn't work, by the way. In fact, some monasteries became infamous for their not-so-holy behaviour. There's one shocking story from France in the 11th century where the entire male and female communities of a double monastery, where monks and nuns lived in adjacent but supposedly separate cloisters, were discovered in, let's call it, an elaborate entanglement. And not metaphorically. We're talking full-blown scandalous affairs involving many members. The church responded by shutting it down and calling the whole place a brothel in disguise, a stinging indictment of monastic failure. What makes this more ironic is how monastic life was sold as the ultimate escape from sin. Want to flee the temptations of the flesh? Easy. Take vows, eat bland food, chant Latin, shave your head, and immerse yourself in prayer. But spoiler alert, it didn't work. If anything, isolation made things worse. Think about it. 0 distractions, long hours alone with your thoughts, the expectation of absolute purity hanging over your head like a guillotine. That's basically an erotic pressure cooker, a perfect breeding ground for repressed desires to manifest in unexpected ways. And don't think the women were exempt. Nuns wrote about their struggles too, sometimes in elaborate code, sometimes with startling directness. One 14th century nun described her nightmares of being seduced by black beasts with burning breaths, classic incubus imagery, a demon said to lie upon sleepers, especially women, to engage in sexual activity. She wrote entire prayers begging God to harden her soul so she wouldn't, well, you get the idea. There's even debate among historians about how many of these supernatural accounts were metaphorical versus an actual way to explain desire they couldn't process otherwise. Some scholars argue that calling it a demon was safer than saying, "I'm horny and I hate it." Monastic quirks and secret lives. Now let's take a quick detour to the stranger side of the monastery. Did you know some monks trained themselves to dream lucidly, just so they could avoid lustful imagery while asleep? Like literal dream yoga, but the medieval Catholic guilt-saturated version. One obscure monk named Hinrich claimed he could recite psalms in his dreams to drown out any seductive thoughts. Was it true? Who knows? But the fact that they even tried that tells you how desperate they were to control every facet of their minds, even their subconscious. And then there's the elephant in the cloister, actual affairs. Despite all the rules and divine threats, plenty of monks and nuns had secret relationships. They smuggled letters, arranged nighttime visits, and even used hidden tunnels or secret passages within the monastery grounds. A few were even discovered with children. That's right, children. In some convents, pregnant nuns were quietly sent away to repent, and the child either ended up abandoned at the monastery gates or mysteriously adopted by local villagers. The official line from the abbess? Miraculous conception or trickery by the devil. Sure, January. Still, not all monks were tragic cautionary tales. Some were fully committed to suppressing their desires, and a few allegedly managed it. There were saints who allegedly never once had a sexual thought in their lives, and others who claimed to have achieved total purity, a state of spiritual bliss. But here's the debate. Did they really, or were they just very good at hiding it, or redefining what pure meant in their private journals, perhaps sublimating their desires into intense religious devotion? Either way, your stay in the monastery leaves you with this weird dual feeling, awe at the intensity of their struggle and sympathy for the fact that these people were told that even thinking about sex meant damnation. That's a tough burden, especially when, let's be real, people are gonna people. Even in 1142, human nature, it seems, is a stubborn thing. You leave through a side door as the Vespers begin, the chant rising behind you like smoke, filling the evening air. Outside, the moon hangs low, a silver disk in the darkening sky, and somewhere nearby, a nightbird calls. You're heading deeper into this medieval world now, where the line between holiness and horniness keeps getting blurrier. And next up, saints with visions that would definitely raise some eyebrows. Saints, visions, and divine eroticism. You don't get far from the monastery before finding yourself wrapped in another tale, this one drenched in incense and mystery, flickering candlelight, and what might be described as sweaty hallucinations. Saints, those holy paragons, weren't exactly immune to lust either. In fact, the deeper you dig into their lives, the more you realize many of them spent years locked in what can only be described as deeply personal, occasionally erotic showdowns with the devil, and sometimes, confusingly, with God himself. You slip into the shoes of a medieval believer, somewhere between skeptical and spellbound, as you pore over the lives of saints, vitae, as the church called them. These weren't just dry moral summaries. Oh no, these stories came with plot twists, seductions, naked apparitions, physical torment, and spiritual ecstasy that got confusingly close to the other kind of ecstasy. Take Street Anthony the Great, for example, one of the earliest Christian hermits. The poor guy fled into the Egyptian desert to escape temptation and wound up with even more of it. According to his biographers, demons sent visions of women throwing themselves at him, their bodies shimmering, their eyes sparkling with unholy allure. In a classic move to combat these impure thoughts, Anthony rolled around in a thorn bush, not metaphorically, like he actually dove into a prickly shrub to inflict pain and distract himself from lust. You're not sure if that worked, but you can't deny the dedication. The sheer willpower involved is astonishing, but it's not just men. The female saints get even weirder. Meet St. Catherine of Siena. She took a vow of virginity at 7 years old. 7! As an adult, she claimed she was spiritually married to Christ, even receiving a ring that, according to her, was made from the foreskin of Jesus. Yep, you blink, reread, and there it is again. Foreskin. Medieval hagiography had no chill, no filter. And then there's St. Teresa of Avila. Although technically she lived a bit after the medieval period, her writings reflect centuries of mystical eroticism. She wrote of an angel piercing her heart with a flaming spear, causing her to writhe in pain and joy so intense it left her utterly consumed. If that sounds vaguely like a romance novel scene involving divine BDSM, you're not alone. Scholars still debate whether these visions were purely spiritual, or whether Teresa was channeling suppressed desires into her metaphysical language. Some even argue she was having out-of-body orgasmic experiences and just didn't have the vocabulary for it, so she called them divine ecstasies. These accounts weren't fringe tales tucked away in dusty corners. They were popular, widely read, even used as instructional material for other devout souls. The takeaway was clear. Spiritual perfection required confronting lust head-on, and the way you defeated it, well, often by enduring increasingly surreal, occasionally sexy torments. But here's the twist that makes you raise an eyebrow. Sometimes the saints enjoyed the visions. There are passages where the tone shifts from horror to awe, from disgust to wonder. Saint Lidwina of Schiedam, a 13th century mystic, claimed that Christ kissed her on the mouth, like romantically, in one vision. His hands caressed her heart. She felt flooded with warmth and heard divine music. Was it symbolic? Maybe. Was it also the only acceptable framework for a woman in that society to describe any kind of intense, transcendent pleasure? Almost definitely. That's where the open debate comes in. Were these saints truly transcending the flesh, or just finding loopholes, creating a sacred space for desires they otherwise couldn't express? Some modern historians suggest these holy visions were often the only safe container women had to express desire, intimacy and pleasure, a kind of spiritual drag show where they slipped into a role society allowed and used it to say what they couldn't say openly. Even stranger, some of these visions mirrored common erotic tropes of the time: the swooning, the breathlessness, the feeling of being overcome, helpless surrender. The language of religious ecstasy bled into erotic poetry and vice versa, creating a fascinating intermingling of the sacred and the sensual. And honestly, after a few hours reading through these saintly accounts, you start confusing them with courtship scenes from romance tales. One moment you're reading about a nun's dream of being enveloped in divine light. The next she's describing a sweetness unlike any earthly touch. You start suspecting these women had very vivid imaginations and very few outlets for them. Meanwhile, the church walked a delicate tightrope. On the one hand, these mystical experiences were signs of divine favour, proof of exceptional piety. On the other, if a vision got too spicy, suspicions of heresy, madness, or even demonic possession weren't far behind. Plenty of mystics, especially women, walked that dangerous line. Be too pious, and you might be declared a living saint. Be too sensual about it, and you might find yourself on trial, facing grave accusations. You duck into a small chapel to catch your breath. Inside, there's a mural of Saint, Margaret holding a dragon by the tail, and honestly, it's not the most innocent image. Everything in this era had double meanings. That's what's so fascinating. No one could talk openly about sex, but everyone knew what they were dancing around. Saints, poets, even the bishops played this coded game. And of course, not every saint made it out unscathed. Saint Christina the Astonishing, her name's not even the weirdest part, was said to levitate, throw herself into furnaces and dive into icy rivers to resist temptation. Her entire biography reads like a medieval fever dream. Some modern scholars think she suffered from epilepsy or a neurological condition, and her visions were misunderstood. Others see her as a mystic genuinely trying to wrestle with the contradictions of body and soul in a world that punished both extremes. You exit the chapel just as a bell tolls in the distance, another reminder of how closely time and ritual wrapped around desire in this world. These weren't just stories for the faithful. They were survival guides, cautionary tales, wish fulfillment, and if we're being honest, slightly erotic fanfic, for people who couldn't read the Canterbury Tales without blushing. By the time you hit the road again, the saints feel less like flawless icons and more like exhausted humans trying to make sense of overwhelming impulses. It's comforting in a strange way. Even the most divine couldn't escape desire's pull. They just found more elaborate, poetic ways to wrestle it. And speaking of poetic wrestling, you're headed next to the courts of love, where knights pine, ladies plot, and nobody's really as noble as the songs say. The courts of love, noble longing and hidden affairs. You arrive at a sprawling castle just as the sun begins to dip behind the towers, casting the ancient stones in a warm, golden hue that makes everything look slightly more romantic than it really is. Inside, a feast is being prepared. Roasted meats, spiced wine, fruit piled high, and you can already hear the pluck of lutes and the low drone of poetry recited in aching tones. Welcome to the world of courtly love, where desire is celebrated. Flirtation is an art form, and yet, paradoxically, absolutely no one seems to be getting laid. It's a dance of longing, not fulfillment. You take a seat in the great hall observing the players of this peculiar game. Over there, a knight kneels before a noblewoman, eyes smouldering, voice trembling as he vows eternal loyalty. He praises her eyes, her grace, the way she walks across the floor like a swan on a lake, blah blah blah. She, in turn, accepts his devotion with just the right amount of disinterest, a raised eyebrow, a smile that could be mistaken for kindness or cruelty. They exchange tokens, a glove, a scarf, sometimes a literal lock of hair. But if he thinks that gets him anywhere near her chambers, think again. This is courtly love, refined, tortured, and as you quickly realize, probably invented by someone who enjoyed emotional suffering. It's not about fulfillment, it's about the longing, the ideal love that cannot, should not be consummated. That's what makes it pure. You start to wonder if this entire cultural obsession was the medieval version of edging, a prolonged exercise in tantalization. The poets of the time, troubadours in the south of France and trouvères in the north, specialized in this stuff. They'd travel from court to court, singing of unattainable women and the agony of loving someone they could never touch. One of the most famous was Chrétien de Troyes, who gave us tales of Lancelot and Guinevere, and other classic situations where true love is always just out of reach, or has to be kept secret, because someone already said I do to a king or an enemy lord. And yes, while these stories were technically fiction, they shaped the actual behaviour of the nobility. People mimicked what they read. Ladies would flirt just enough to inspire devotion, but not so much as to lose control. Knights would perform absurd feats, jousting, slaying beasts, writing sonnets by candlelight, all for a single smile or whispered word. You start to think maybe the real reward was the performance itself, the idea that wanting was nobler than having. But here's the kicker, that's all on the surface. Scratch a little deeper, and it turns out these chaste declarations were often just a glossy cover for very real affairs, especially at court where political marriages were the norm. Love often had to be found elsewhere, illicitly. You trail a few couples into side corridors, watching the masks drop the moment they're alone. The longing becomes touching, the poetry becomes whispers, and the noble restraint becomes an excuse to sneak off behind the tapestry. One particularly juicy example, Eleanor of Aquitaine and her famous Court of Love. She's one of the most powerful women of the 12th century, and she basically hosted salons where ladies debated the rules of romantic behaviour, like it was a medieval episode of The Bachelor. Should a man pursue a married woman? Should jealousy be encouraged? How do you test a lover's loyalty? It sounds all very polite and philosophical until you realise many of the participants were embroiled in affairs of their own, often with the very knights writing those swoony poems. Still, this whole courtly love thing had strict rules. One big one. It was supposed to be non-physical. That kept it from being technically sinful in the eyes of the church, or at least provided plausible deniability. The church didn't love it, of course. It seemed suspiciously secular, all about earthly desire instead of divine love. But it was hard to condemn someone for saying they admired someone else's soul, especially when the admiration came with such lovely metaphors. but the lines blurred constantly. You discover a story of a nobleman who cut himself with a dagger to prove his devotion to a lady who refused him. She, moved by his gesture, agreed to a secret meeting. You'd think that's where things finally got physical, but nope, they just talked. She told him he'd earned her heart, and he promised to serve her until death. That was it. Everyone left disappointed, including you, and yet these relationships carried immense weight. A single flirtation could destroy reputations, ruin marriages, even spark wars. Kings got jealous, queens got clever, knights switched sides. You watch it unfold in slow motion, the way a look becomes a rumour, and a rumour becomes scandal. One lady of the court passes you and mutters, "It's not the love that's dangerous, it's the politics." She's not wrong. There's also the fringe theory you stumble across. Some scholars believe that courtly love was actually a kind of literary smokescreen for real-world power negotiations. Noble women, so often pawns in arranged marriages, used the rituals of courtly love to assert influence. By choosing who to favour, who to tease, who to shame in front of others, they subtly controlled social dynamics. So maybe that glove wasn't just a token, it was a chess move. And then there's the sex, or lack of it. Some historians argue that courtly love was a kind of proto-erotic theatre, a way to sublimate desire into something socially acceptable, a safe outlet for powerful emotions. Others insist there was sex, just hidden behind metaphor and poetic layers, thick enough to confuse any chaperones. After all, medieval texts rarely said things outright. Instead of, "they slept together," it was, "he took shelter in her garden," or "she granted him solace in her bower." You know, very subtle. By the end of the evening, you realize you've been watching an elaborate masquerade, everyone pretending to be above the flesh while quietly negotiating access to it. Lust here wears a mask of longing. It's choreographed, constrained, and still somehow manages to burn through the silk and lace and fan fluttering like wildfire. You step outside the hall, night cool and perfumed with rose petals and wine. Somewhere behind you, a poet is still reciting to a half-interested duchess. But you're headed somewhere different now. You've seen how the nobles pretend. It's time to see how the peasants really live and how they get around having no privacy, no power, and no poems. Peasant life. Bundling, barns, and bawdy humour. You leave the glittering world of nobles behind. No more velvet drapes or lute music, no more fan dances of flirtation. Now the air is heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth, wood smoke, and livestock. You're standing in the centre of a medieval village somewhere in northern Europe, maybe England or France. The houses are cramped and close together, made of timber and thatch, and there's no such thing as personal space, let alone privacy. But that doesn't mean people here don't fall in love or lust or end up tangled in bedrolls on chilly nights. In fact, they often do. Often without the luxury of silk bed sheets or carefully coded poetry. Their desires are raw, immediate, and utterly human. You peek into one of the cottages, ducking beneath the low doorway. The interior is a single room. One bed, maybe two if they're lucky. Parents, kids, and sometimes even a goat all sleep within feet of each other. And here's where things get resourceful. There's a tradition in some regions called bundling or bed courtship, where a young couple, often in their teens, is allowed to lie together in bed, with clothes on, to talk, bond, and test their compatibility. Yes, you heard that right. In bed together, usually with a wooden plank or a sackcloth between them, a bundling board or bundling bag, but still more progressive than you'd expect. Of course the idea was that they wouldn't have sex, that they'd just, hang out, supervised intimacy. But let's be honest, they were teenagers, they were curious, and they were surrounded by hay. You do the math. And sometimes this led to what was charmingly called premarital negotiation. If a girl became pregnant, the community often expected the young man to marry her. Shotgun weddings weren't uncommon, and neither was the quiet acceptance that, hey, maybe the bundling bag was more symbolic than effective. What surprises you is how communal all this is. In a society where privacy is almost non-existent, the community becomes both witness and judge of romantic relationships. Neighbours gossip, families keep tabs, and public reputation can make or break a courtship. You hear about a ritual where village women would inspect the bedsheets after a wedding night to confirm consummation had occurred. If the sheet was bloody, all was well. If not, rumours flew, and the marriage might even be annulled. You wonder how many clever brides pre-stained the fabric just to avoid scandal. Sex among the peasantry isn't shrouded in the same performance of chastity as it is among the nobility. It's part of life, practical, sometimes tender, sometimes hurried. You watch couples steal moments behind haystacks or in the forest, where birdsong and the rustle of leaves provide a thin veil of cover. A few are caught, sure, but punishment is often lighter than you'd expect. A small fine, maybe public penance. Everyone knows desire doesn't wait for the church's blessing. That said, there were rules, and crossing certain lines could be dangerous. Adultery, especially if it involved someone of higher status, could lead to exile, flogging, or worse. But among the lower classes, sexual transgressions were often handled within the community, with a mix of humour and stern admonishment. You witness a strange custom called charivari, where a man who married a much younger woman or someone suspected of infidelity gets paraded through the village on a donkey, while people bang pots and yell insults. It's half punishment, half performance, and it reeks of petty vengeance disguised as moral outrage. Still, there's humour here too, a kind of earthy acceptance. One local midwife, a stout woman with a gap-toothed smile, pulls you aside and says, "The Lord can keep his sermons. Babies come when they want." She's attended dozens of births, some from married couples, some not, and doesn't seem particularly scandalised by any of it. She even jokes about how many noblemen have left their blessings in village cradles. And yes, that's a thing. Noblemen would sometimes use their power to take advantage of peasant girls, leading to awkwardly mixed status children who are often quietly absorbed into the village fabric, or not so quietly cast out. One thing that stands out is how marriage itself isn't always a grand event down here. Sometimes it's just a handshake in front of witnesses, a verbal agreement that they'll share work, food, and a bed. The church wants a priest involved, of course, but in many cases, local custom rules the day. If you live together, if everyone sees you as a couple, then that's that. It's marriage by consensus, and surprisingly flexible, until it isn't. Of course, there's always someone watching from the margins. You meet an old widow who whispers about the woods women, young girls who disappeared into the forest to avoid shame after a pregnancy, or who practiced their own kind of folk magic to control fertility. There are herbs passed in secret, teas that bring on the moon, and charms tied under skirts. Some of it's practical, some of it's superstition. All of it reveals how deeply women tried to maintain control in a world that often denied them agency. And this is where you hit the quirky fact of the night. In some parts of medieval Europe, young couples would carve love runes into tree bark, not just as a romantic gesture, but as a kind of spiritual insurance policy. If they couldn't afford a priest's blessing, the tree would do. It was natural, eternal, and frankly, more available than a bishop. You pass one such tree, hearts carved into the bark, initials barely legible, and wonder how many generations of secret love stories it's absorbed. Scholars still argue about just how common sex before marriage was among peasants. Some point to church records full of fines and punishments. Others say those records only show the rare cases that cause scandal. What's clear is that the rules on paper and the reality in the field rarely lined up. Desire finds cracks. It grows in the shadows. And in medieval villages it shaped lives in ways more honest, and sometimes more humane than all the noble poetry in the world. You leave the village behind, your boots muddy, your mind swirling with images of flickering hearths, whispered promises, and stolen kisses behind barn doors. The peasants may not have had silks or ballads, but they had passion, risk, and moments of tenderness carved into the bark of trees. Next, you're heading back to the cloisters, but this time the women are running the show, nuns with ink-stained fingers and some surprisingly spicy secrets. The convent, female desires, and forbidden affections. You step through a creaking wooden gate into the walled stillness of a convent, half expecting to be met with angelic chanting and the scent of incense. Instead, you're greeted by the sharp tang of vinegar and a surprising note of roasted onions drifting from the kitchen garden. The air is clean, but thick with unspoken stories. Nuns glide across the courtyard with practiced grace, habits flapping in the breeze. eyes lowered, hands folded. Yet behind the serenity, there's a pulse. Something vibrant and human beats beneath the linen and Latin. You can almost feel it. Inside the convent walls, it's supposed to be a sanctuary from sin, a haven from temptation, a place where women devote themselves entirely to God. And sure, on the surface, everything follows the script. There are prayers, chants, hours of silence, and manuscripts copied with almost obsessive precision. But soon you realize this place is far more than a retreat from the flesh. It's a community of women thinking, feeling, dreaming, and yes, occasionally fantasizing, just like everyone else in medieval society. And they kept records. You find yourself in the convent library where the air smells of old parchment and beeswax. One of the sisters, older and quietly amused by your curiosity, unlocks a cabinet and shows you something few outsiders ever see. The private writings of nuns. Not doctrine, not psalters, not dry theological commentary. No, what she lays before you are diaries, fragile collections of yearning, shame, visions and desire, scribbled between prayers and poems. Some of it spiritual, yes, but not always the way you'd expect. One entry you read describes a dream where the writer sees the Virgin Mary cradling her with a tenderness that sounds less like maternal comfort and more like an overwhelming wave of bliss. Another recounts being kissed on the mouth by an angel again and again until she wakes up gasping, convinced she's either blessed or damned. You're not sure which one she wants more. One nun writes about a fellow sister's golden hair, like summer wheat, and the gentle weight of her hand during prayer. It reads like longing, quiet, intimate, almost mournful. It never says anything overt, but the undertones are undeniable, hinting at deep, unspoken affection. And it turns out this wasn't an isolated case. In convents across Europe, from England to Italy, scholars have found letters and poems passed between women. Sometimes coded, sometimes shockingly direct. One nun in Germany wrote of her hunger for the warmth of Sister Clara's body. Another, in a tiny outpost in France, confessed that she sought God's mercy for dreaming of carnal joy while sharing a bed in winter. You pause here. Wait, sharing a bed? Oh yes, convent dormitories were communal, often with 2 or more nuns per straw mattress. In colder seasons, it was practical, economical, and in some cases an unexpected invitation for intimacy. While rules forbade physical affection, enforcement was inconsistent. After all, there weren't cameras or DNA tests, just a lot of dim candlelight, heavy robes, and human need. Still, not everything was hidden. In fact, some abbesses kept astonishingly honest records of misbehaviour. You come across one case where a nun was caught with a visiting monk under a staircase, no less. Another was discovered with a local butcher's daughter who'd been smuggled into the grounds disguised as a laundry assistant. In most cases, the punishment was temporary seclusion, extra prayers, and a stern talk. But sometimes, especially if noble families were involved, scandals were buried entirely, swept under the ornate rugs. And then there were the love tokens, small crosses, carved charms, notes tucked into rosary pouches. One nun buried a letter beneath the roots of a cherry tree, addressed to the one whose voice haunts me in sleep. She never signed it. She didn't have to. Everyone in the convent knew. But it wasn't always about sex or forbidden love. Many of these women were intellectual powerhouses, starved for stimulation. They read everything, Augustine, Plato, even Roman poets if they could get away with it. They debated theology late into the night, translated texts and wrote mystical reflections that, when you squint just a little, sound like erotic poetry disguised in the language of piety. One visionary nun describes her soul being pierced by a divine flame and opened like a flower to the light. If that's not metaphorical foreplay, you don't know what is. Now here's your fringe fact for the night. Hildegard of Bingen, the famous 12th century abbess, composer and mystic, once wrote that a woman's soul could become pregnant with divine inspiration, an idea that some modern readers interpret as spiritual queerness. She also had an intense, possibly romantic bond with another nun named Richardis, which ended in a heartbroken flurry of letters when Richardis was transferred to another convent. Hildegard's grief reads like a breakup album in Latin, of course. Modern scholars debate what all of this means. Were these relationships romantic, platonic emotional coping mechanisms in an all-female environment? Did nuns understand their own desires in the way we frame sexuality today? There's no single answer. What's clear is that these women lived full, complex emotional lives, far from the image of passive, celibate angels that church propaganda liked to project. You also learn that many women didn't choose the convent freely. Families often sent daughters here as a financial decision or political strategy. If you weren't beautiful enough to marry advantageously, or had too many sisters ahead of you in line for an inheritance, off to the nunnery you went. Some embraced it, finding peace and intellectual stimulation. Others didn't. One diary has a single heartbreaking line: "I do not love my vows, but I obey them." It hits harder than any sermon. And let's not forget the occasional outliers, the rebellious nuns who snuck out of the convent at night, visited taverns, and even took lovers. In 14th century Italy, one group of nuns was discovered hosting masked dances in their cloister, complete with hired musicians. When church officials arrived, they found wine, laughter, and a suspicious lack of guilt. The women were reprimanded, of course, but not expelled. Why? Because some of them were related to bishops. Surprise? As you walk back through the cloisters, moonlight falling through arched windows, you hear the echo of a hymn rising from the chapel. It's beautiful, haunting, but layered beneath the melody is the undeniable truth that these women, so often imagined as blank slates of virtue, were just as full of longing, conflict, imagination, and secrets as anyone else. Maybe even more so, tucked away from the world with only candlelight and each other for company. Next, you'll slide into a confession booth, where the air is thick with incense and whispered sin, and on the other side of the screen, a priest who might be more familiar with temptation than you'd expect. The confessional, whispers of sin and human frailty. You step into the shadowed hush of a stone church, where stained glass throws scattered pools of coloured light across worn pews, and the scent of centuries-old incense clings to every surface. The altar gleams in the distance, but your attention is drawn to a far darker corner, the confessional booth. It's an odd little wooden structure, like a closet, with secrets wedged into its very grain. You slip inside, close the curtain, and find yourself breathing the same musty air as generations of sinners who've crouched here before you. On the other side of the screen, a priest clears his throat, and what unfolds isn't exactly what you'd expect. In theory, the medieval confessional is a sacred space, a channel for divine forgiveness. In practice, it's a window into the messy, often hilarious, and sometimes heartbreaking reality of medieval sexuality and morality. The priest begins with the usual questions. Have you committed any mortal sins since your last confession? Then he gets down to business, often guided by detailed penitentials, manuals that listed sins and their prescribed penances. And these lists were thorough. They covered every conceivable transgression, from thought to deed, with a particular focus on anything related to the flesh. You realize these manuals weren't just about condemning sin. They were also inadvertently revealing just how creative medieval people got with their desires. One penitential from the 7th century, attributed to Archbishop Theodore, listed specific penances for everything from bestiality, yes, really, and it had different penances depending on the animal, to having sex during Lent. It was like a bizarre medieval catalogue of don'ts. You hear confessions muffled through the screen that range from the mundane to the truly bizarre. A farmer's wife admits to having unclean thoughts about the new stable boy, promptly followed by a detailed description of her dream. A merchant confesses to using unnatural positions with his wife, and the priest, instead of just chastising him, launches into an uncomfortably specific lecture on approved marital coitus positions. Missionary, obviously. It's clear these priests were dealing with a lot. The sheer volume and variety of sexual sins confessed paint a picture of a society where desire was constantly bubbling beneath the surface, despite strict religious injunctions. One particularly amusing category was sins of the imagination. If you dreamed about someone you shouldn't, or even just thought about them in a lustful way, that counted. The line between thought and deed was often blurred, and it meant a lot of people were doing penance for their own minds. You wonder how many of these detailed confessions were actually just elaborate medieval fan fiction told to a captive, anonymous audience. A peculiar tidbit. Some penitentials even had sections on sexual magic, spells or charms used to gain a lover, induce impotence or prevent conception. The fact that these were listed as sins suggests they were common enough to warrant clerical attention. The penances themselves were varied, often surprisingly practical. Fasting, prayer, pilgrimages, almsgiving. But for sexual sins, they often included lengthy periods of abstinence or severe dietary restrictions. Imagine explaining to your wife that you can't touch her for the next 2 years because you had a naughty dream about the baker's daughter. It must have made for some awkward dinner conversations, and sometimes the penance was truly public. For notorious cases of fornication or adultery, you might be forced to stand barefoot outside the church door, holding a candle, or even endure a public whipping. It was all about making an example. However, a fascinating contradiction emerges. While the church condemned almost all forms of non-procreative sex, it also understood that human nature was, well, human. Many priests, particularly in rural areas, likely took a more pragmatic approach. They lived in these communities. They knew their parishioners. They heard the same sins repeated week after week, century after century. It's hard to stay scandalized when dealing with the realities of human passion. You imagine the priest on the other side of the screen, sighing internally, perhaps even offering a sympathetic word, recognizing the universal struggle. Historians still debate how strictly these penances were enforced, particularly for minor transgressions. It seems there was a lot of local variation, with some priests being far more lenient or understanding than others. You also learn that priests themselves weren't immune. Despite vows of celibacy, many had concubines, often referred to as focariae or hearth keepers, or even secret families. The confessional offered a unique glimpse into the temptations faced by the clergy too. A common penance for a priest found guilty of fornication was often just a temporary suspension and a hefty fine, far less severe than the punishments meted out to lay people for similar offences. It reveals a clear double standard that undoubtedly bred cynicism among the populace. As you slip out of the confessional, the air of piety feels a little less oppressive, replaced by a sense of shared humanity. The stories whispered in the dark booth reveal a medieval society, not of stern, unyielding virtue, but of constant negotiation with desire, where sin was a daily reality and forgiveness a continuous process. You realize that for all its grand pronouncements, the Church was constantly grappling with the untamable force of human passion. It tried to regulate it, shame it, punish it, but it could never truly extinguish it. The human heart, it seems, beats to its own rhythm, even under the shadow of divine judgment. Your journey through the medieval understanding of lust, sex, and sin has revealed a surprisingly complex and often contradictory world, a testament to the enduring power of human desire in the face of strict moral codes.
Hey guys, tonight we begin with one of ancient Rome's more unusual professions, the orgy planner. Yes, someone had to schedule the wine, supervise the grapes, organize the entertainment, and make sure no one accidentally brought their mother-in-law. It might sound absurd, even decadent, but Roman feasting culture wasn't just about indulgence, it was about power, status, networking, and, well, quite a bit of chaos. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like this story if it resonates with you, and let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first light of dawn creeps over the 7 hills of Rome, casting a golden glow across the marble columns of the Forum and the sprawling rooftops of the Subura. It's 50 CE, and you wake in your modest villa on the Aventine Hill. a small but respectable dwelling overlooking the Tiber's lazy curve. The air is cool and thick with the scent of olive oil lamps that burned late into the night, their wicks now blackened stubs in clay holders. You're the city's most sought-after orgy planner, a maestro of decadence tasked with orchestrating tonight's elite feast at Senator Lucius Piso's sprawling estate on the Palatine Hill, a grand affair that could make or break your reputation among Rome's elite. Your sleeping mat, a simple straw pallet covered with a worn linen sheet, is still warm beneath you, the straw rustling softly as you shift. Your tunic, a faded blue garment you've worn for 3 days straight, lies crumpled in a heap on the terracotta floor, its hem stained with ink from late-night planning. Anxiety grips you like a centurion's iron fist, not because you're unprepared, but because your mind has already conjured 1,000 disasters before you've even touched your morning barley porridge, which sits cold in a clay bowl on a wooden table by your bed. As you sit up, rubbing sleep from your eyes with calloused hands, a faint glow catches your attention. A magical scroll has been slipped under your door, shimmering with an eerie light. It's a Roman RSVP app, an enchanted invention dropped into your life by some mischievous god, Mercury perhaps with his love of commerce and chaos, promising to streamline your guest list, but threatening to unleash a storm of complications instead. You stumble to the door, your bare feet cold against the tiled floor, the cool morning air brushing your skin as you bend to pick up the scroll with the grim resolve of a soldier reading his draft notice. The scroll is heavier than it looks, its papyrus surface etched with glowing Latin script that shifts and dances like fireflies in the dim light of your room. Unrolling it, the app buzzes to life with a faint hum, displaying the guest list in real time. Lucius Piso, yes. Aurelia, uninvited. Yes. Senator Petronius, arbiter, maybe. Junius Blaccus. Yes, with 2 unnamed guests. Flavia Maxima. Yes, requests no dormice. Governor Crispus. Yes, with 3 extra wives. Your stomach churns like the Tiber during a storm, the bitter taste of dread rising in your throat. Aurelia, Piso's tempestuous wife, wasn't invited, and her presence guarantees drama. She once hurled a jug of garum at a harpist for playing off-key during a solo she didn't even request, and the poor musician fled the feast in tears. Petronius's maybe is a nightmare. The man's sharp tongue could turn a feast into a battlefield of insults, and you can't plan seating without knowing if he'll show. Junius's unnamed guests are equally troubling respected clients, gladiators, or, gods forbid, a giraffe in a toga. Flavia's dormice request means reworking the menu at the last minute, and Crispus's extra wives complicate the seating chart further, as each will demand a prime spot to flaunt their status. You mutter, "This cursed app will be the death of me," and grab your quill, its feather frayed from overuse, scribbling notes on a wax tablet. Separate couches for Piso and Aurelia, extra wine for Petronius, flexible seating for Junius's mystery guests, a dormice-free platter for Flavia, and a contingency plan for Crispus's wives to avoid a jealous spat. Outside, Rome is stirring awake, the city's heartbeat growing louder with each passing moment. The distant hum of merchants setting up stalls in the forum drifts through your window, mingled with the clatter of cartwheels on cobblestones, the shouts of fishmongers hawking their wares, and the bleating of goats being herded to market. A faint whiff of baking bread from a nearby oven wafts in, teasing your empty stomach, but there's no time to eat. You pull on your sandals, the leather creaking with age and stained with the dust of 100 errands, and step into the chaos of the day, your mind already juggling flaming amphorae. Your first stop is the Subura market, a labyrinth of noise and colour where the scent of fresh bread battles with the stench of fish stalls, unwashed bodies, and the occasional pile of donkey dung left in the street. The app glows again, its light pulsing as it suggests trending foods for the feast: oysters, honeyed dormice, roasted peacock, figs, dates from Judea, cheese wrapped in vine leaves, and a dessert of candied nuts and almond cakes. You weave through the crowd, dodging a drunk poet reciting an ode to his lost sandal, his voice slurring as he stumbles into a fruit stall, toppling a basket of apples. The vendor yells, shaking a fist, but the poet merely laughs, staggering off with an apple in hand. You shake your head and approach the seafood vendor, a wiry man with a grin too wide for comfort, his stall piled high with baskets of glistening oysters. Oysters, fresh from Baiae, you demand, and he hands over a basket, smirking, fresh-ish. You grimace, imagining the fallout if a senator gets a bad one. Rumours of poisoning would spread faster than wildfire in the forum, and your name would be whispered in every bathhouse as the planner who tried to kill half the Senate. They'd ruin me, you mutter, inspecting the oysters closely, their shells slick with seawater, but suspiciously silent, no sign of life. You move on to secure the dormice, plump little creatures rolled in honey and poppy seeds, though you set aside a few for Flavia's alternative platter, muttering a prayer to Ceres that she doesn't notice the substitution. You also grab crates of figs and dates, their sweetness a promise of decadence, and a wheel of cheese wrapped in vine leaves, its tangy aroma making your stomach growl. A street dog sniffs too close to your basket, its ribs visible beneath matted fur, and you shoo it away with a sandal, grumbling, "Not today, you flea-bitten thief." The dog whines but scampers off, leaving you to haul your purchases back to the villa, your arms aching under the weight. Piso's estate is a sprawling marvel of Roman architecture, its marble columns carved with ivy motifs, and its central atrium dominated by a fountain where water burbles softly, catching the sunlight in a shimmer of rainbows. The villa's walls are painted with frescoes of nymphs and satyrs, their colours vibrant despite the years, and the air carries the faint scent of myrrh from last week's gathering. Slaves scurry about, their tunics damp with sweat as they polish the mosaic floors, a depiction of Bacchus riding a panther, its tiles gleaming like the Tiber under a full moon. You inspect the triclinium, the grand dining hall where tonight's debauchery will unfold, its high ceiling supported by cedar beams, and its walls draped with crimson silk curtains that ripple in the breeze. The silk cushions on the couches are fluffed to perfection, sturdy enough to withstand the weight of a toga-clad magistrate and whatever activities they might engage in. You run a hand over one, imagining the inevitable wine stains, and adjust its position slightly to ensure it looks effortlessly luxurious. Moving on to the latrines, you ensure they're scented with myrrh, a soft, luxurious haze that whispers opulence even in the most undignified moments. A slave has placed a small clay lamp in each, its flame flickering gently to mask any odours, and you nod in approval, though you remind him to refresh the vinegar for the sponges on sticks. The wine amphorae are next, 3 of Falernian for the elite, aged and expensive enough to make Piso wince when he sees the bill. 2 of Cacuban for show, their labels prominently displayed to impress, and a jar of vinegar for anyone who dares arrive after the 3rd course, a subtle punishment for tardiness. A young slave, no older than 12, with a mop of curly hair and a nervous smile, accidentally drops a fig while arranging a fruit pyramid on a silver platter. You sigh, pick it up, and whisper, 5-second rule, doesn't exist in Rome, before placing it back with a wry smile, brushing the dust off your hands. The boy blushes, muttering an apology, and you pat his shoulder, remembering your own early days as a nervous apprentice to a banquet planner in Ostia. The app buzzes again, now displaying messages from guests. Petronius requests a seat far from Junius. His poetry is a crime against the muses. You roll your eyes, adjusting the seating plan on your wax tablet, its surface scratched and worn from countless revisions. Piso gets the centre couch, the place of honour, but Aurelia must be on the opposite side of the room, preferably near a dull equestrian who won't tempt her wrath a wealthy but boring man named Titus, who collects rare snails and talks of nothing else. Junius and his mystery guests are relegated to the West End flexible seating for whatever chaos they bring, with extra cushions in case one of them turns out to be a giraffe after all. You assign a courtesan to keep Petronius occupied, hoping her charms will dull his sharp tongue, and place Flavia near the entrance, where she can avoid the dormice trays and make a quick exit if needed. Crispus's 3 wives are a puzzle. You place them on separate couches, each with a clear view of the dancers to keep them distracted, but far enough apart to avoid a jealous spat over who gets the best view of the entertainment. The seating chart isn't just a plan, it's a diplomatic strategy, a delicate balance of power, lust and vendettas, all reclining together on silk-covered couches, drinking from the same communal bowl of wine. You also leave a few empty cushions, plausible deniability for last-minute arrivals, or a place for a poet to sulk if his verses are ignored. You step back, admiring your work like a sculptor regarding his marble, knowing full well someone will hit it with a hammer before the night is over. By mid-morning, you gather the staff in the atrium, a motley crew of 30 soul slaves, performers, and runners, all looking as stressed as you feel. Their faces are a mix of exhaustion and resignation, each knowing the chaos that awaits, their tunics patched and faded from years of service. There are cupbearers to assign their zones: Central Triclinium, Periphery Lounge, West Garden, and you remind them to dilute the strong wine unless instructed otherwise. Some guests think they can handle full Falernian, you warn, recalling last month's senator who sang off key after his 3rd goblet and tried to serenade a statue of Minerva, much to his wife's horror. They cannot. The fan-bearers are next, their timing crucial to keep guests cool without blowing out candles or exposing someone's secrets mid-flirtation 1 gust too strong, and a toga might reveal more than intended. Fruit attendants, a role you invented after a guest complained of unpicked grapes 2 summers ago, are instructed to refresh trays constantly, peel grapes only upon request, and remove any fruit that dares to shrivel into a raisin. The musicians a troupe of 4 flute girls, 2 lyre players, a backup aulos duo, and a man who balances figs on his feet while walking on his hands are already bickering over tempo. You separate the lead flute girl from the lyre player, recalling last month's duet that had guests offering marriage counselling mid-feast, their argument over a single note turning into a shouting match that drowned out the poetry readings. The dancers, oiled and dramatic, lean against a pillar, their coal-lined eyes watching you as you run through their cues. No improvisation. We're not reliving the Bacchic fire incident. That disaster, 3 summers ago, involved a dancer twirling too close to a torch, setting a curtain ablaze and forcing guests to flee into the garden half-dressed. You lock eyes with the youngest slave, a boy tasked with collecting discarded sandals, his small frame trembling with nerves. You share a silent nod, a pact that he won't fail you, and he clutches his basket tighter, his knuckles white with determination. The provisioning list is a nightmare of its own, a military requisition disguised as a menu. It's cost enough to buy a modest villa in Ostia. Beyond the oysters and dormice, you've ordered a roasted peacock, its feathers reattached for dramatic flair, though it tastes like shoe leather. A dish more for bragging than eating, as guests will boast for weeks about having chewed something that once strutted like a diver. There's a pig stuffed with live doves, a spectacle where the birds fly out when it's sliced open, always a crowd pleaser despite the mild trauma for the doves, who flutter about in a panic until they find a perch on the rafters. Dates from Judea, figs from Carthage, and cheese wrapped in vine leaves round out the savoury offerings, alongside candied nuts, almond cakes, and a dessert spectacle. A cake shaped like the Colosseum, filled with live songbirds. You haven't figured out the baking logistics yet. Last time, the birds escaped mid-prep, and a slave spent hours coaxing them out of the atrium's rafters with bits of bread, while another chased a particularly stubborn sparrow through the kitchen, knocking over a vat of garum in the process. The wine list is equally extravagant: 3 amphorae of Falernian, 2 of Caecuban for show, 1 of Massic for variety, and that vinegar jar for the tardy. You scribble a reminder: no garum accidents near the bread. Last month's anchovy-scented rolls nearly sparked a riot, with 2 magistrates refusing to speak for weeks after accusing each other of sabotage. One even claimed it was a plot to ruin his chances at the next election. The kitchen is a battlefield by noon, the air thick with the scent of roasting meat, honey, and utter panic. The head cook, a former naval officer turned domestic tyrant with a scar across his cheek from a pirate skirmish, barks orders at a trembling assistant over the proper stuffing ratio for the dormice. More honey, less poppy seeds, or I'll throw you into the Tiber myself, he roars, waving a ladle like a gladius, his face red with exertion. The peacock is prepared, its feathers reattached with meticulous care, its glassy eyes staring at you as if judging your efforts, while the cook mutters about how it'll impress the fools, even if it tastes like a sandal. The pig is stuffed, the doves inside cooing nervously, and you hope they don't escape before the reveal. Last time, one flew into a senator's toga, causing a scream that halted the feast for a full 10 minutes. Platters of figs, dates, and honey cakes line the counters, their colours a vibrant contrast to the chaos around them. A pastry shaped like the Colosseum is being glazed, its surface dusted with powdered almonds, though a slave accidentally eats a corner, earning a swift reassignment to grape-peeling duty. The cook catches him, shouting, "That's for the guests, not your greedy mouth," and the boy scurries off, his cheeks stuffed with pastry. In one corner, a vat of garum, the infamous Roman fish sauce made from fermented anchovies, simmers, its pungent aroma making your eyes water and your stomach turn. You shout, "Keep it away from the bread," recalling last month's disaster, and the cook nods. Though you don't trust his smirk, he's been known to accidentally splash garum on dishes he doesn't like, claiming it's a regional variation. The afternoon brings a new crisis. The musicians are late, and panic begins to set in like a slow tide. You'd booked a troupe of 4 flute girls, 2 lyre players, a backup aulos duo, and a man who balances figs on his feet while walking on his hands. But none have arrived, and the sun is already high in the sky. You send your fastest runner, a lanky boy named Gaius with legs like a gazelle, to the Subura, instructing him to find them alive, conscious, and dressed. You don't ask why they're late, likely drunk, asleep, or tangled in a romantic mess from last night's Saturnalia rehearsal, a festival that always leaves the city in disarray. The dancers, now pacing the atrium, complain they can't rehearse without music, their anklets jingling with every dramatic step, their voices rising in a chorus of frustration. A minor poet, a wiry man with a laurel wreath askew on his balding head, seizes the chance to recite an ode to his mother's 3rd marriage, his voice droning like a mosquito as he gestures dramatically with a goblet of watered wine. You shut that down quickly. No one wants to hear it while eating dormice, and the thought of poetry over squeaking rodents makes your stomach turn. As a contingency, you note the cook knows 2 songs on a cracked reed pipe, and a slave has a decent voice if kept sober. You pray it doesn't come to that, imagining yourself humming a tune while a slave shakes a jar of lentils as percussion, the guests staring in horror at the makeshift performance. Just as you're about to resort to that humiliation, the musicians stumble in, dishevelled and smelling of spikenard, their tunics stained with wine and their eyes bleary. The lead flute girl's missing a sandal, her hair a tangled mess of curls, and the lyre player tunes his instrument too lovingly, his eyes dreamy as he hums a love ballad under his breath. You station him near the door for easy removal if he starts an impromptu serenade, muttering, "No one needs your heartbreak tonight." The fig balancer, a wiry man with a crooked grin, demonstrates his skill, wobbling slightly but managing to keep 3 figs aloft until one falls and rolls under a couch, prompting a slave to crawl after it, muttering curses. The scent of the feast must be as opulent as the food, a statement of wealth and temptation that lingers in the air like a whispered promise. You descend to the storage chamber, a cool, dimly lit room beneath the villa, where alabaster jars of myrrh, rose oil, saffron water, cinnamon oil, and an experimental blend called Essence of Nile Lotus line the shelves like sacred relics. The lotus blend smells like an expensive pond, and you decide against it, fearing it might remind guests of the Tiber's less savoury days. The atrium will smell of citrus and cedarwood, a clean, sharp opening note to welcome guests as they arrive, their senses awakened by the crisp scent. The triclinium gets heavier scents: myrrh, frankincense, a touch of musk, whispering, "You might make a mistake tonight, and that's okay." The garden alcoves, where secrets and togas will be misplaced under the moonlight, are scented with rose and cinnamon, just enough to make someone faint if they linger too long in the perfumed haze. You assign an attendant to warm the perfumed oils for guests' hands and feet. Cold oil is for barbarians, warm oil for seduction and good lighting. The latrines get a discreet scent, ensuring even the most undignified moments feel luxurious, with a faint hint of saffron to mask the inevitable. You warn the staff, don't overdo it. We want luxury, not a senator blaming the smell for his nosebleed. One of the dancers, a tall woman with braided hair and a mischievous smile, requests a personal scent, something hypnotic to entrance the guests. You hand her a blend so potent it once caused a minor riot during a Saturnalia feast, warning, "Use it sparingly." She smiles, her eyes glinting with mischief, and you know she won't listen. She'll douse herself in it and leave a trail of fainting senators in her wake. As evening approaches, you conduct a final walk-through, your tunic now clinging to your sweat-soaked skin, the fabric damp and heavy from a day of running between tasks. Oil lamps flicker across polished marble, casting a golden glow that says, "You're not poor tonight," their light dancing on the frescoes of nymphs and satyrs that adorn the walls. A flower boy sprinkles petals at the entrance white roses, not yellow, after last time's debacle when Piso's wife complained about the colour, claiming it clashed with her stola. You remind the boy not to overdo it. Last month, a guest slipped on lavender and slid into the atrium, threatening to sue for damages, though he settled for an extra amphora of wine. The bronze fountains run smoothly, their water catching the lamplight in a shimmer of rainbows, small fish darting beneath the surface, a new addition, since a general's wife nearly drowned in the koi pond last year after too much Falernian. Grapes are pyramided in impractical displays, their purple skins glistening like jewels, though you notice one pyramid leans precariously and adjust it before it topples. Pillows are fluffed with unnatural symmetry, though you adjust one slightly to make the decadence look effortless, as if the villa simply exists in a state of perpetual luxury. In the triclinium, tables are low, recliners angled perfectly, each cushion perfumed with rose oil and rotated to hide last month's wine stains from a senator's birthday disaster. Stains you couldn't fully scrub out, despite hours of effort with vinegar and a coarse brush. Silver goblets, bronze platters, and blown glass amphorae gleam, while the cheese sweats slightly, adding authenticity to the rustic charm. You quietly remove a beetle from a fig, pretending it never happened, and check the bread for garum contamination clean. For now, though you eye the kitchen suspiciously. In the garden, the lighting is soft, dim enough to be flattering, bright enough to avoid accidents involving potted plants and dignity. A servant fans incense, the effect ethereal, the smoke curling upward like a prayer to Venus. For a moment you let yourself believe it's all under control, standing in the garden as the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The illusion shatters when the first guest arrives with a dramatic thump, followed by laughter that echoes through the atrium like a trumpet blast. Lucius Piso strolls in, smelling of ambition and cologne that costs more than a soldier's annual wage, his toga pristine and his hair oiled to perfection. "Tonight, my friend, we make Bacchus blush," he declares with a wink, trailed by a gaggle of courtesans in shimmering stolas, a minor poet clutching a scroll of verses, and a man with a lyre who may or may not be invited. You decide not to check the app, which buzzes incessantly with updates. Rate your orgy prep. Guests pour in flowing robes, gold-threaded tunics, embroidered sandals, and expressions of affected boredom. They've arrived early to seem important, already tipsy to seem relaxed, their voices a cacophony of laughter and boasts. A slave offers perfumed towels. One guest, a portly merchant with a gold ring on every finger, demands spiced wine, calling it intellectual. You don't correct him, nodding to a cupbearer to fetch it, though you know he just wants to impress the courtesan on his arm. The garden fills with murmurs, introductions, and hushed judgments louder than actual conversation, the air thick with the scent of myrrh and ambition. You separate two senators who haven't spoken since the goat insult incident, a scandal involving a misinterpreted compliment about livestock that ended with one calling the other a bleating fool in the Senate House. You notice Piso reclining too close to a courtesan, his hand brushing her arm, while Aurelia glares from across the room, her fingers already twitching toward a garum jug on the table beside her. You signal a slave to move the jug out of reach, hoping to avoid a repeat of last time's disaster. The entertainment begins with a hush that ripples through the triclinium, the guests' chatter fading as all eyes turn to the centre of the room. A dancer steps forward, golden veils flowing like liquid sunlight, anklets chiming with each graceful step, her gaze somewhere between divine inspiration and complete apathy. The flute joins in, notes spiralling through the perfumed air like a gentle breeze, their melody weaving through the murmurs of the crowd. For a moment, the feast slips into rhythm-chewing slows, conversations quiet, even the poet pauses his muttering, his scroll forgotten in his lap. But then a guest, flushed with wine and bravado, demands a reenactment of Leda and the Swan, shouting, "Bring the swan," as if you keep one on hand. Another suggests Orpheus with real torches, ignoring the fire hazard, and a third proposes Gladiator juggling with water jugs, his voice slurring as he waves his goblet for emphasis. You smile, assuring them it's all planned, though your heart races as you signal the dancers to continue. The mime twins told to wait until the third course enter early, miming a seduction scene with a fig and a sausage, their exaggerated gestures drawing gasps and laughter. Half the room laughs, the other half looks confused, and one man, a retired general with a scarred face, applauds as if he's at the theatre of Pompey, shouting, "Magnificent!" Someone throws a peach, another retaliates with a fig, and you declare it a symbolic offering to Bacchus, earning cheers from the crowd who raise their goblets in a toast. You make a note. No more throwable fruit, ever, and signal a slave to clear the fruit trays before the guests turn the triclinium into a battlefield. By the third course, the wine flows like the Tiber in a flood. Amphorae opened like promises, their contents disappearing faster than you can track. Guests draped across couches like tipsy gods, laugh too loudly, flirt too boldly, and forget who they came with, their voices a chaotic symphony of revelry. You've instructed servers to dilute the Falernian one amphora can make a senator sing or confess to tax fraud, and you've seen both happen at past feasts. Conversations turn personal. A patrician compares his wealth to Jupiter's, gesturing wildly with a goblet that sloshes wine onto his neighbour. A merchant brags about his camel, claiming it's faster than any horse in the legions. A woman in pearls whispers a joke about the emperor's feet, her voice low but her laughter sharp. You pretend not to hear she's great with seating arrangements, and you'd miss her if she's exiled for treason. A poet tries to seduce a philosopher with a verse. Your eyes are like olives, dark and briny, his voice trembling with emotion. You don't intervene, but you wince, wondering how olives could ever be romantic. In the garden, a guest gives a speech about cleaning marble fountains, believing it's profound, his words slurring as he gestures at the fountain with a goblet. No one stops him. It's tradition, and the other guests nod solemnly, too drunk to notice he's repeating himself. Two courtesans engage in a passive-aggressive compliment battle, each smile a dagger, each laugh laced with venom. Your stola is so bold, one says, her eyes narrowing. And your hair so natural, the other replies, her smile tight. One gifts the other a fig, and you note to remove all figs by dessert to avoid bloodshed, imagining the fruit being used as a weapon in their silent war. The orgy heats up, scandals simmering like the garum in the kitchen, the air now thick with the scent of wine, sweat, and myrrh. Guests stop using names, calling each other Apollo, Venus, or that guy with the peacock, their identities blurring in the haze of revelry. Someone fashions a laurel wreath from table herbs, wearing it crookedly as he declares himself king of the feast, his toga slipping off one shoulder as he stands on a couch, goblet raised. 3 people splash in the fountain, one trying to baptize the others with rose water, claiming it's a new ritual to honor Neptune, though he's clearly forgotten which god he's honoring. You redirect a gladiator reenactment away from the Neptune mosaic with a tray of dates, the tattooed men falling for the distraction like toddlers, their mock battle forgotten as they stuff their faces. Under a table, 2 guests argue about stoicism while rubbing each other's feet, their voices slurred with wine, their argument devolving into a debate over whether Zeno would approve of foot massages. You cough discreetly, they nod, pretending to look for a lost bracelet, though neither wears jewellery. A flute girl bursts into tears after a guest questions her tuning, taking it as a metaphor for her life choices, her sobs echoing through the garden. You send a lyre player with pomegranate seeds to console her, hoping the seeds distract her from her existential crisis, though the lyre player starts humming his love ballad again, making her cry harder. A large man attempts to seduce a marble bust of Venus, feeding it olives and reciting poetry about her marble heart, his voice thick with emotion as he strokes the statue's cheek. You let him, it's better than his earlier rant about grain tariffs, which nearly started a brawl when he accused a merchant of price fixing. The party spirals further into chaos, a whirlwind of silk, wine, and questionable decisions. A guest knocks over a torch, and you catch it before it hits the tapestry. Your heart pounding, but your face calm, years of practice keeping your composure intact. A young patrician, drunk on Falernian, starts a drinking game involving gladiator trivia. Name 3 famous duels or drink. A minor senator fails, is booed by the crowd, drinks and collapses into a pillow, quoting Virgil in his sleep, his snores mingling with the flute music. In the west alcove, a woman in a golden stola proposes to a statue of Apollo, claiming it spoke to her through the wine, her voice trembling with devotion as she places a ring on its marble finger. You don't correct her. She's a generous tipper, and you'll need her coin for next month's feast. A flame dancer performs too close to the pool, singeing a guest's toga, and you douse the flames with a goblet of diluted wine, earning a cheer from the crowd, who raise their goblets in a toast to your quick thinking. A guest in the garden starts a philosophical debate about the nature of pleasure. but his argument is interrupted when he accidentally sits on a platter of dormice, squeaking in protest as he leaps up, scattering the rodents across the lawn. You signal a slave to collect them, muttering, "Flavia will be pleased she missed that." The app buzzes again. "Rate your orgy." You shove it into a basket, muttering, "Not now," as you adjust a lamp, nod to a server, and glide through the shadows, the still centre in a storm of silk, grapes, and moral compromise. As the night wears on, the chaos reaches its peak, a crescendo of decadence that would make even Bacchus blush. A group of guests in the atrium decides to reenact the founding of Rome, using a table as a makeshift Palatine Hill and a goblet as the sacred plough. The Romulus of the group, a drunken equestrian, accidentally knocks over the table, sending platters of figs and cheese crashing to the floor, while his Remus laughs hysterically, clutching a candied almond as if it's the city's first brick. In the triclinium, a senator's wife, emboldened by wine, decides to lead an impromptu dance, climbing onto a couch and twirling with a veil she's stolen from a dancer, her movements more enthusiastic than graceful. She trips, landing in the lap of a startled philosopher who spills his wine and declares, "This is the true meaning of chaos." The crowd cheers, mistaking his words for a toast, and more wine is poured. A poet in the corner, ignored by all, begins reciting his verses to a potted plant, claiming it's the only one who understands his soul, while the plant's leaves droop under the weight of his melancholy. In the kitchen, the cook, now 3 goblets deep himself, decides to experiment with a new dish mid-feast, tossing leftover garum into a batch of honey cakes, claiming it's innovative. You catch him just in time, confiscating the cakes before they reach the guests, though the smell lingers, a reminder of the near disaster. A guest in the garden, inspired by the dove's earlier escape, decides to liberate the fish from the fountain, scooping them into his toga and releasing them into the pool, where they swim in confused circles, much to the amusement of his drunken companions. Dawn breaks with the subtlety of a dropped amphora, sunlight creeping across the marble floors and illuminating the carnage with a soft, unforgiving glow. Overturned goblets litter the triclinium, their contents staining the mosaics in abstract patterns of red and gold. A sandal is wedged in a fruit bowl, its laces tangled with grape stems, and a nobleman sleeps face down in a decorative urn, snoring softly, his toga hiked up to reveal a tattoo of a laurel wreath on his thigh. The perfume has faded into something resembling regret, the air now heavy with the scent of spilled wine, wilted roses, and the faint tang of garum from the cook's failed experiment. You step over a passed-out flute girl, her sandal still missing, her flute clutched to her chest like a child's toy, and assess the damage with a weary eye. A pile of olives has been arranged into a crude likeness of the emperor. You kick it under the table, not wanting to explain that to Piso, who would either laugh or accuse you of treason. The slaves begin the silent ritual of post-orgy cleanup, their movements slow and deliberate, bundling wine-stained linens, carting off half-eaten peacocks, and sweeping incense ashes into neat piles. You herd the doves from the pig performance into a corner, tossing them candied almonds they coo gratefully, having survived a night of chaos, their feathers ruffled but their spirits intact. The fish in the pool, relocated by the drunken guest, swim in lazy circles, their scales glinting in the morning light, a small reminder of the night's absurdity. A guest groans from under a table, his toga askew, a garland of wilted roses tangled in his hair. You nod in acknowledgement but offer no help. Everyone must face their own consequences, and you've done enough shepherding for one night. You make a list titled Debrief on a fresh wax tablet, its surface smooth under your stylus. Never serve throwable fruit. Do not allow live poetry battles near open flames. keep the Venus statue in storage during future events, seat Piso far from anyone with a garum jug, ban the RSVP app forever, and speak to the cook about his innovative garum honey cakes. A philosopher, one of the few still awake, leaves a polite note scratched into a shard of pottery. Thank you. I've learned things I must never speak of. You smile faintly, tucking the shard into your tunic, a small token of the night's success. In the garden, the fountain still burbles, now littered with rose petals, a single sandal, and a few stray fish that didn't make it to the pool. The sky above Rome is a soft pink, the city waking to a new day as if nothing happened, its streets filling with the sounds of merchants, children, and the clatter of carts. You retire to your room, the small space feeling like a sanctuary after the chaos of the night. You kick off your sandals, the leather worn thin from a day of running between market and villa, and collapse onto your mat, the straw rustling beneath you, its familiar scent a comfort after the overwhelming opulence of the feast. There's no applause, no awards, just the quiet knowledge that no one saw the chaos because you absorbed it, a silent guardian of Rome's revelry. Tomorrow they'll tell stories of how perfect it was, how the wine flowed like a river, the dancers dazzled like goddesses, the night shimmered with decadence and scandal, a memory to be recounted in bathhouses and at future feasts. They'll speak of the peacock's grandeur, the dove's dramatic escape, the philosopher's fall into a senator's lap, and the poet who wooed a plant, their laughter echoing through the forum. You'll just sleep, the weight of Rome's revelry lifting as your eyes close, the city's heartbeat fading into a gentle hum, a lullaby for a planner who tamed chaos for one more night. The Tiber flows on, the seven hills stand sentinel, and Rome dreams, its decadence a whispered legend in the morning light.
Hey guys, tonight we begin with the rowdy, smoky, and slightly sticky world of the medieval tavern, the unsung heart of every town, the unofficial news centre, and the only place where a knight, a farmer, and a bard could all get equally drunk and equally robbed. It wasn't just a place to drink. It was a place where danger, laughter, and disease mingled freely beneath a thatched roof. You've trudged through a muddy street that smells like a blend of horse, smoke, and questionable soup. It's raining, of course, or just finished, so everything's slick, including your only pair of shoes. You're tired, you're hungry, and you've nearly been run over by a cart full of turnips twice. You need a drink. So, how do you find a tavern in a medieval town? There are no glowing signs, no Yelp reviews, and certainly no GPS. What you do have are your ears. Just follow the noise. Somewhere past the blacksmith's forge and the fishmonger yelling about his fresh river eels is a chorus of laughter, shouting, and someone aggressively singing about a goose. And there it is, a crooked wooden building, leaning slightly, as if even the architecture has had one too many. Hanging above the door is a wooden sign, barely legible, with a crude painting of, is that a barrel, or a bear, or maybe both? Either way, this is it. Welcome to the tavern. The front step is slick with ale, and as you push open the heavy iron-hinged door, it lets out a creak so long and dramatic it might qualify as its own form of entertainment. Instantly, warm air and the rich perfume of smoke, wet wool, stale beer, and mystery meat hit your face like a drunken handshake. You've made it. Inside, the ceiling is low enough to make tall men duck and drunk men bump their heads. The floor is dirt. Not metaphorically, literally, though someone's laid down straw in an attempt to pretend it's cleaner. It isn't. There are no private booths, no waiters with menus, and no such thing as quiet conversation. This is a medieval tavern, and it only comes in two settings: rowdy and closed due to fire. You spot an open seat at a lopsided bench near the hearth, but it's wet with what, you don't ask. Someone nearby is arguing about a stolen chicken. Another is passed out with a ladle still in his hand. A one-eyed dog gnaws on a bone under a table, like he pays rent there. And this, friend, is just the entrance. You've only just arrived, and already it smells like a night to remember, or forget. As the heavy tavern door slams shut behind you, the darkness wraps around your senses, like a damp wool blanket. Warm, uncomfortable, and slightly suspicious. Your eyes adjust slowly. Candlelight flickers against soot-stained walls, casting dancing shadows that make even the chairs look like they might pick a fight. The hearth blazes in the far corner, doubling as both heating and open flame hazard. Smoke drifts lazily in the air, not quite escaping through the chimney that might be stuffed with a dead crow. But what hits you hardest isn't the noise or the heat, it's the smell. A medieval tavern scent is less aromatic and more emotional trauma. The top notes are ale, warm, sour, and splashed liberally across every surface. Beneath that, sweat, years of it, human, horse, and maybe something mythical. Add a hint of mouldy bread, wet straw, and a whisper of boiled onions, and you have a blend no perfumer has dared bottle. The tables are carved with years of initials, crude drawings, and knife scars. They wobble with a kind of stubborn pride. The benches creak under the weight of muddy boots, thick cloaks, and questionable decisions. The floor, dirt as promised, but layered with straw meant to soak up spills, spit, and the occasional unconscious customer. You step carefully. One wrong move, and your foot sinks into something with a texture best left undescribed. The crowd is a living, breathing organism. Loud laughter erupts in one corner, while two men argue about the price of a pig in another. A woman slams a mug down hard enough to spill half her drink, and no one even flinches. A man at the next table stares at you with the dazed look of someone who's either thinking very deeply or forgetting how chairs work. Someone nearby sneezes. The entire left side of the room collectively leans away. And still, despite the overwhelming assault on your modern sensibilities, there's something welcoming here. The tavern is alive. It's rough, raw, and completely unfiltered. The medieval version of a community hub, minus the hygiene, and with 400% more shouting. You find your seat. It's a bit damp. It's probably cursed, but for now, it's yours. At first glance, the tavern's layout looks like someone arranged the furniture during an earthquake, and then just decided to leave it that way. There's no blueprint, no bar area, no cozy booths in the back. Just a sprawling, uneven spillage of tables, benches, barrels, and the occasional wooden crate being passed off as a seat. Everything is too close together, or too far apart, depending on how drunk you are. The hearth is the only real centerpiece. A big open fire roaring against one wall, doing its best to provide warmth, light, and a healthy dose of indoor smoke inhalation. Around it, people crowd in for comfort, like moths with mugs. Those with the best seats hog the warmth. Those without question mark. Well, that's what ale is for. The bar, if you can call it that, is usually just a thick wooden plank resting across two barrels, sagging under the weight of jugs, mugs, and elbows. Behind it stands the tavern keeper, multitasking between pouring drinks, yelling orders, and giving that one guy in the corner the death stare of, You still haven't paid for last Tuesday. There are no menus. You ask what's available and brace yourself. The answer is usually ale, or shut up and wait. A narrow staircase, possibly original, definitely splintery, leads to the upstairs rooms. If you squint, you can see a boot hanging from one of the railing posts. No one's entirely sure if it's decorative or a warning. Some taverns have a back room. It might be for storage. It might be for illegal gambling. Or it might be where the last person who insulted the barmaid was taken, never to be seen again. It's best not to ask. The walls are stained with candle soot. The windows are covered with greasy cloth or animal hide. And every surface has been thoroughly polished by the elbows, boots, and spilled drinks of generations past. And maybe a chicken. Somehow, despite the chaos, or because of it, it works. Everyone knows where to go, how to sit, when to shout, and when to duck. It's not organised, but it is alive. Every medieval tavern has a ruler, and it's not the local lord or the tax collector. It's the tavern keeper. They may not wear a crown, but don't be fooled. This person runs the show. Equal parts: chef, server, accountant, babysitter, and executioner of barroom justice. The tavern keeper is a one-person institution, and they take no nonsense. If it's a man, he's likely built like a barrel with arms, grizzled, grumpy, and carved from cured meat and bad decisions. If it's a woman, and often it is, she's sharper than a blacksmith's file, and can silence a room with a single look. Either way, they've seen everything, heard worse, and cleaned blood out of straw before breakfast. They greet regulars with a nod, strangers with suspicion, and troublemakers with a tankard to the head. Behind the bar, they keep mental tabs on who's paid, who owes, and who's had 3 too many. And they do it all without writing anything down, because medieval literacy might be rare, but tavern memory is terrifying. The tavern keeper sets the tone. If they're in a good mood, the place hums. If they're in a bad mood, you'd better drink fast and keep your jokes to yourself. They're the referee in every argument, the judge in every cheating scandal, and the first to grab a club when a fight breaks out. You do not mess with the tavern keeper. They also know everything. Who's in debt, who's having an affair, who arrived in town under a false name. Need information, bribe the barkeep, need protection, sit near them, need a favour. Better hope you didn't break a mug last week. Some have a helper, a son, daughter, spouse, or orphan they sort of adopted, and now make carry barrels twice their weight. These assistants run drinks, mop floors, and try not to spill anything or get stepped on by drunks. So while the tavern may feel like chaos to you, it's actually a very delicate ecosystem. And in the centre, commanding it all like a storm god in an apron, stands the one person keeping the ale flowing, and the roof from collapsing into a riot, the tavern keeper. So you finally settle onto a creaky bench, dodging elbows and spilled stew. Your throat's dry, your boots are damp, and it's time for the main event, the drink. But don't expect a wine list or a polished mug. This is a medieval tavern. Your choices are limited, lukewarm, and possibly life-threatening. Let's start with the classic, ale. Unfiltered, unpasteurized, and usually brewed in the back room where the dog sleeps. It's thick, cloudy, and often comes with floaties, bits of grain, yeast, or possibly a chunk of the previous customer's moustache. It's not cold, because there's no ice, and you don't ask how long it's been sitting in the barrel. You just drink and hope. Next up, mead, honey wine. Sounds fancy, right? In reality, it's sweet, strong, and occasionally explosive. If the tavern keeper made it themselves, it might be delicious, or it might taste like regret and bee venom. It's usually served to nobles, wedding guests, or that one bard who insists on being paid in gold or mead. Then there's cider, made from apples that were either freshly picked or dropped on the ground 3 weeks ago. Sharp, tangy, and served in cracked mugs that may double as soup bowls by morning. It's the drink of choice in orchard-rich regions, or for those who want something just alcoholic enough to forget the smell of the man sitting beside them. Wine? Technically, yes. But unless you're in southern Europe, or the nobility's in town, it's likely watered down, soured, and served with a side of sarcasm. Good wine is reserved for lords, bishops, and the merchant who just sold 12 crates of salt. And water. That's a bold choice, because half the time it's teeming with invisible death. Boiling costs fuel, and clean wells are rare. That's why even children drink ale. It's not about the buzz, it's about not dying of dysentery before age 8. No one's measuring shots or crafting cocktails here. You drink from mugs made of wood, clay, or tin. Some still have last night's stew in them. You raise your mug, sniff it, and sip. It's warm, it's bitter, and somehow it's perfect. Because in the medieval tavern, if it's wet and won't kill you immediately, it's a fine vintage. So, you've survived the drink, barely. Now your stomach growls, reminding you that you haven't eaten since sunrise, and your last meal was mostly barley and sadness. Time to eat, but don't get excited. There's no menu, no waiter, and absolutely no one asking if you have any dietary restrictions. You don't order food in a medieval tavern. You ask what's left, then hope it's hot and only vaguely mysterious. The star of the tavern table is usually pottage, a thick stew made from whatever grains, vegetables, and questionable proteins were lying around that day. It's been cooking in the same pot since Monday, and it's now Thursday. New ingredients are added daily. Nothing is removed. It's less of a meal and more of a culinary time capsule. If meat is involved, congratulations. It's probably rabbit, pigeon, or the unlucky chicken who wandered too close to the fire. If it's game meat, it might be delicious, or it might be aged past reason and seasoned with desperation. Your bowl is made of wood or clay. Your spoon, either your own or your fingers. Most people carry their own knife, so eating is a BYO cutlery affair. And don't expect napkins, just the sleeve of your tunic or a shared rag that's seen things it'll never forget. Bread is also on offer. It's tough, dark, and heavy, more a weapon than a food. If it's soft, it was baked today. If it's hard, it was baked last week. Either way, it pairs well with cheese that smells like an old boot and has started developing its own personality. Sometimes there's salted fish, sometimes pickled eggs. Occasionally, you'll find a tavern offering a special, which is just a fancier way of saying, we had too much of this lying around. Flavor optional, texture unpredictable. Still, in the flickering firelight, with noise all around and the warmth of food in your hands, it's not bad. It's filling, it's hot, and if you don't think too hard about what's floating in your bowl, it might even be comforting. You're not here for fine dining. You're here to eat like a survivor. Once you've found your seat, ideally one without a knife stuck in it, you start to notice the real entertainment. The people. A medieval tavern is the original social media feed. Loud, chaotic, half-true, and fully committed to oversharing. To your left, there's a red-faced farmer, already deep into his fourth ale, retelling the same story about his cow giving birth sideways. He slaps your shoulder mid-sentence, like you're a lifelong friend, or a good replacement for the pig he usually drinks with. At the far end of the room, a hooded stranger sits in shadows, nursing a drink slowly. He could be a runaway monk, or a bandit, or just really bad at eye contact. Either way, you're not making small talk with him unless you want to disappear behind the stables. Near the hearth, a soldier in battered armour is regaling a group with tales of battle. His story involves dragons, Frenchmen, and a talking sword. It's definitely false. No one cares. His tankard is full, and his audience is laughing. There's a merchant, loud and sweaty, shouting prices for grain that no one asked for. He pulls gold coins from his pouch, like a man begging to be robbed by midnight. A pair of locals play dice on a warped table, their expressions intense. One of them clearly cheats. The other knows and lets it happen, probably saving the fight for when his ale runs out. A bard strums in the corner, voice cracking on the high notes of a love song that sounds suspiciously like one he just made up. No one minds. He's wearing pants and he's in tune. That's already better than last night's guy. Women wander through the crowd, some tavern staff, others working their own business. They're sharp-eyed, confident, and absolutely not to be trifled with. They'll flirt, laugh, or knock your teeth in, depending on your tone. Children occasionally dart between legs, swiping leftover bread or coins. No one stops them. It's just part of the rhythm. Everyone is watching, drinking, plotting, and pretending not to notice the man slumped under the table. This tavern isn't just a place to eat and drink. It's a living, breathing performance. And tonight, you're part of the cast. Forget lutes and ballads for a moment. The real soundtrack of a medieval tavern isn't a song. It's a symphony of chaos. It begins with the clink of mugs, dozens of them, slamming against wood in celebration, negotiation, or drunken misfire. Some clang cheerfully, others shatter completely. Both are met with cheers. Then comes the laughter. Big, loud belly laughter that sounds like it escaped from a wild boar. Most of it makes no sense. A farmer chuckles at his own joke about hay. A knight giggles at the word pottage. A monk wheezes uncontrollably every time someone says duck. You learn quickly not to ask. Voices layer over one another, each louder than the last, fighting for dominance like roosters in a coop. There's arguing, storytelling, shouting about taxes, and at least one person misquoting scripture to win a bet. The bartender yells orders while swatting flies. A barmaid shouts at a man who tried to grab her, and someone keeps repeating another round, like a battle cry. And in the corner, the bard, with a half-tuned lute and 3 missing strings. He plays the same 4 chords on loop, occasionally bursting into verses about lost love, found chickens, or noblemen who wore their pants backwards. No one really listens, unless he starts singing about someone in the room, at which point things get very entertaining or very dangerous. Someone spills something. Someone burps loud enough to make the rafters tremble. Someone else falls off a bench and keeps talking from the floor like it's intentional. In the background, dogs bark. A goat bleats. Why is there a goat? And chairs scrape across dirt like thunderclaps in a wooden cavern. It's not peaceful, but it's oddly rhythmic. Occasionally, the room goes quiet. Not by choice, just a sudden lull. It lasts exactly 3 seconds. Then someone farts heroically, and the music starts again. This isn't background noise. This is the tavern's heartbeat, raw, rowdy, and relentlessly alive. If you listen closely enough, it starts to make sense. A kind of harmony born from disorder. And like the rest of the tavern, it only gets louder the longer you stay. Once the ale starts flowing and the stew starts settling, the tavern transforms. It's no longer just a place to eat and drink. It becomes a medieval casino, minus the velvet ropes and with way more yelling. Gambling is the sport of the evening, and everyone plays, from weathered soldiers to barefoot boys with borrowed dice. There's no dealer, no pit boss, no regulation. Just a cracked wooden table, a handful of copper coins, and the vague promise that someone's about to lose their dignity. Dice are the game of choice, carved from bone, wood, or whatever was lying around. They clatter across tabletops, like rolling thunder, each toss followed by a mix of cheers, groans, and accusations of witchcraft. No one trusts the dice. Everyone uses them. Then there are cards, if you're in a more cultured part of town. Thick, hand-painted, worn to the edges, and always missing 1 or 2. The rules shift based on who explains them. Sometimes you're trying to get the highest number. Other times you're matching symbols, or just making it up as you go. It's like poker, but with more slapping. Wages range from money to mugs to livestock. Yes, someone once bet a goat, someone else bet their boots, and someone else bet their own freedom for the night. Spoiler, he lost. The regulars are slick. They shuffle quickly, roll slowly, and smile a little too wide. Cheating, of course, it's half the fun. A hidden die here, a marked card there, a mysterious cough when the lucky player leans in. If you win big, you buy a round, or risk getting jumped. If you lose badly, you smile, pretend you meant to, and slowly push your chair back toward the door. Side games erupt too. Arm wrestling, thumb wars, and the ever-popular who can drink the most without falling over. The winner earns applause. The loser earns a night under the table, and a headache that lasts until next market day. But even when the rules are unclear and the stakes are absurd, the energy is addictive. Because, in a medieval tavern, luck isn't just a game. It's a gamble with your purse, your pride, and possibly your pants. As the night deepens and the tavern fills with warmth and humidity, a new kind of performance takes the floor. One made of words, music, and confident nonsense. This is story time, medieval style. A bard clears his throat in the corner, gently plucking at a half-tuned lute, the strings squeaking like old boots. He's missing a few teeth, but not a bit of confidence. With a dramatic flourish, he launches into a ballad of heartbreak and heroism. Something about a knight who fell in love with a mermaid and drowned, only while reciting poetry. No one believes him. Everyone listens anyway. That's how it works here. Truth is optional. Entertainment is everything. Around the tables, others join in. Not bards, just patrons with ale-fueled bravery and a tale to tell. One man swears he once wrestled a bear and lived to drink about it. Another claims he saw a witch turn a cow into a goat. A third insists he's related to Charlemagne on his mother's cousin's side. Everyone's story begins with, "You won't believe this, but..." And they're right. We don't, but we want to. Boasts become ballads. Mishaps become myths. Someone tells a joke so bad, it circles back to being good. Someone else recites a poem, likely plagiarized from a monk's scroll. The room claps, hoots, or throws bread, depending on the quality or quantity of the performance. If you're lucky, a scold or minstrel might be passing through. Professionals who travel from town to town, exchanging music for coins, meals, and occasionally a place to sleep indoors. Their songs are polished, their tales long, and their ability to rile up a crowd dangerous. But even they know the golden rule of tavern tales. Never let facts ruin a good story. In this smoke-filled room, with the fire crackling and the mugs sloshing, storytelling isn't just entertainment. It's tradition, it's connection, it's how you make friends, enemies, and the occasional lifelong drinking partner. By midnight, half the tavern is reenacting the story of the one-legged knight who fought off 6 highwaymen with a ladle. You laugh, you cheer, you forget it's all made up, because in a medieval tavern, every liar is a legend if the story is good enough. As the night deepens and the ale keeps flowing, something changes in the air, a kind of boozy boldness. The bard is halfway through his 3rd song about unfaithful shepherdesses, and suddenly everyone's feeling romantic. Welcome to medieval flirting. Subtlety has left the building. It starts with eye contact, or at least one eye slightly squinting through a mead-induced haze. A man with 2 remaining teeth leans across a bench and slurs. "My lady, your beauty burns brighter than the hearth." She responds by hurling a bread crust at his forehead. The room cheers. Others try their luck more gently, offering refilled mugs, clumsy compliments, or offers to help carry a bowl of stew so it doesn't spill. Spoiler, it still spills. If you're a woman, in the tavern, staff, guest, or travelling merchant, you're likely used to fending off at least 3 would-be poets, 2 arm wrestlers, and 1 man who tries to impress you by balancing a knife on his nose. Sometimes it works. Usually it ends with a black eye or an empty purse. For those actually seeking companionship, courtesans work the room with practiced ease, knowing who has coin, who has charm, and who will pass out before making it to the stairs. Transactions are discreet, but the implications are loud. Jealous lovers? Oh yes. Nothing sparks a tavern fight faster than a stolen glance, a wandering hand, or a husband catching his wife laughing a little too hard at the bard's joke about bishops. Tables are overturned, mugs are weaponized, a bench gets broken in half, again. And yet, somewhere in the middle of all this chaos, genuine sparks fly. A shy baker's daughter and a travelling stonemason laugh over shared stew. 2 drunk farmers bond over a mutual hatred of turnips. A monk accidentally flirts with a nun. Love, or something like it, survives in even the rowdiest corners. Because in the medieval tavern, romance is equal parts charm, chance, and not falling face first into your bowl mid-sentence. You might win a heart, you might earn a slap. Either way, you're going to remember it, or at least hear about it the next morning. It was bound to happen. Maybe someone spilled a drink. Maybe someone accused someone else of cheating at dice. Maybe 2 people claimed the same bench, and neither backed down. Or maybe someone said something about someone else's mother. Goat or soup? Doesn't really matter. Suddenly, it's on. The tavern, once a blur of music and mugs, turns on a dime. A stool flies. A tankard crashes to the floor. Someone yells, "Hold my bread," and launches themselves over a bench with all the grace of a drunk catapult. No one is surprised. In fact, most people don't even stop drinking. A bar fight in the Middle Ages isn't rare, it's expected. it's practically a feature. And while it sounds terrifying, it's usually more comedic than deadly. People swing wildly, miss, trip, and land in someone's dinner. Hair is pulled, beards are grabbed, shirts are torn. The tavern keeper roars like a battlefield general, while holding a ladle in one hand and a club in the other. Occasionally, someone joins the fight with no idea why. They just saw action and leapt in, fists first. Others place informal bets, cheer, or slide their mugs out of splash range. Weapons? Rare. Most folks know better. Pulling a blade in a tavern can turn a casual brawl into a full-blown tavern legend. And no one wants to be banned from the only place that serves hot food and warm ale. Eventually, someone hits the floor and stays there. Someone else stumbles into a wall and decides that's as good a place as any to sit and rethink their life. The fight burns out like a tavern candle, suddenly and without ceremony. And here's the strange part. Once it's over, it's over. The fighters are separated, mugs are refilled, someone starts a song, and within 10 minutes, everyone is laughing again, including the guy with the bleeding nose. No grudges, no lawsuits, just bruises, stories, and maybe a new nickname like One-Eyed Arnold or Benchbreaker Bill. Because in a medieval tavern, a good fight is just part of a good night. Messy, ridiculous, and weirdly bonding. And if no one gets hurt too badly, it's just another round of entertainment. So the brawl's over. The bard has passed out mid-ballad, and your stomach is full of mystery stew and slightly fermented cider. It's time to sleep, or at least attempt to. But don't expect a feather bed and lavender-scented linens. This is a medieval tavern, not a spa. If the tavern offers lodging, it's likely a creaky staircase away. Upstairs, past slanted floors and beams low enough to test your skull's durability. The rooms are small, cold, and absolutely shared. Privacy doesn't exist. You're sleeping shoulder to shoulder with strangers, some snoring like church bells, others dreaming loudly in languages you've never heard. Beds? Technically. Most are straw-stuffed mattresses, thin, lumpy, and crawling with what medieval folks fondly called companions. You lay down fully clothed, boots on, dagger under your pillow. Not for comfort, but for defensive strategy. Blankets are shared, so are smells. And if someone had garlic earlier, someone always has garlic, it will become an intimate part of your dreams. If you're too poor or too drunk for a room, you sleep downstairs, on a bench, under a table, or just in a corner by the hearth, curled up next to a dog that may or may not belong to the tavern. You'll be stepped on, probably sneezed on, and maybe used as a footrest. The tavern never really quiets. Even after the last mug is drained and the last fight patched up, there's always someone muttering in their sleep, a log popping in the fire, or a distant fart echoing through the rafters. And yet, somehow, you drift off. It's not comfortable, it's not clean, but it's safe enough. The fire keeps the worst of the cold away. The tavern keeper keeps watch with one eye open and a club in hand, and the noise becomes its own kind of lullaby. Familiar, human, alive. You'll wake with a sore neck, a dry mouth, and a questionably acquired bruise. But for a few hours, you sleep in the company of travellers, rogues, farmers, and fools. No kings, no silence, just snoring, straw, and the faint hope your boots are still there come morning. Dawn creeps in like an uninvited guest, sliding pale light through the cracks in the shutters and poking at your eyelids with merciless persistence. The tavern has changed overnight. Not quieter, exactly, but quieter in a defeated sort of way. You open one eye. Someone's boot is on your chest. Someone else is mumbling in their sleep about sheep taxes. The bard is snoring under a table, clutching his lute like a lover. A chicken hops across the floor, pecking at yesterday's bread crusts. No one questions where it came from. The fire has died down, leaving the room cold and smoky. A few patrons begin to stir, groaning like wounded warriors from battles fought entirely inside their own skulls. One man sits up, looks around, and lies back down, having decided today isn't worth it. The tavern keeper is already up, because of course they are, clattering mugs, sweeping straw into fresh piles, reheating something in a pot that smells both inviting and slightly vengeful. They shoot a look at the bodies on the floor, then bang a ladle against a mug like a morning bell from hell. Up or out. That's your wake-up call. There's no breakfast buffet. If you're lucky, there's more pottage, now even thicker than last night. Bread is rewarmed. Ale is watered down, and no one has the strength to complain. Some patrons just dunk their heads in a barrel of rainwater outside and call it clean living. You check your pouch. 2 coins and a button. Better than expected. Your boots are still here. One of them has a bite mark, but they're yours. A win. A few new faces trickle in. Early risers, travellers, workers in need of a drink before dealing with livestock, taxes, or worse, neighbours. The tavern begins to stir again, like a beast slowly waking. Someone starts retelling a story from last night. It's already changed, of course. Now there were 2 fights, and the bar song summoned a ghost. Everyone nods like it's gospel. The night was chaos. The morning is groggy, grimy, and full of regret. And yet, you smile, because somehow you survived it. By now, you've felt the sweat, the smoke, the sticky ale under your boots. You've survived the shouting, the flirting, the pottage, and possibly a flying bench. And through all that, one thing becomes clear. The medieval tavern wasn't just a drinking hole. It was the beating heart of the community. In a world with no phones, no newspapers, no social networks, the tavern was where news travelled. A merchant from the coast could share gossip from a foreign port. A soldier could describe the war from the front. A bard could sing songs that stitched people together, even if the lyrics changed every night. This was a place for connection. Farmers drank beside craftsmen. Pilgrims shared bread with thieves. Strangers became friends, or at least drinking buddies, before the second round. Here, social classes blurred. Rumours were born, alliances were made, and grudges were buried or fueled further, depending on how the dice rolled. The tavern was also where business happened. Deals made, contracts shaken over splinters and spilled cider. It was a court, a confessional, and a theatre stage, all at once. You could find a job, lose your purse, get married, or start a feud in a single evening. And it offered something else too. Something you couldn't buy at the market or pray for in a chapel. Relief from the cold, from the work, from the endless seriousness of surviving medieval life. For a few hours, you could sit near a fire, hear a bad joke, sing a worse song, and forget, just briefly, how hard the outside world was. Even if the ale was warm, the bed was itchy, and the food had more bones than broth. The tavern gave you a sense of being alive among the living. And in an age where everything from disease to war to a sharp winter could take you without warning, that was no small thing. So, when you stepped into a medieval tavern, you weren't just buying a drink. You were buying belonging, a story, and maybe if the floor wasn't too crowded, a place to sleep where the fire still burned. Because long before cafes and pubs and coffee houses, there was the tavern. Loud, dirty, honest, and absolutely unforgettable.